You're listening to the Veteran Etc. podcast, as there's always more to be said about a veteran. Join your host, Mike Kim, a veteran, ex-monk, seasoned war trauma therapist, and writer, as he shares his years of research in veteran readjustment culture and the meaning of warrior life. Now, here's your host, Mike Kim.
Veteran Etc. This is a show about veterans, but not just about veterans and military personnel on TV or in movies or in books or what you see back home, like your neighbor's son or your own relative. This show goes deeper. I'm your host, Mike Kim, and I am a veteran as well as a researcher of veteran issues as well as the military. My research goes back to 1993, and in that, I don't just look at the events and the people and the politics tied to the veteran reality. I go in deeper. I try to find the daily lives of veterans and military personnel, the things that are said about them, the things that they say about themselves, and other voices, thus the etc. factor. This episode offers an audio essay, more than entertainment, a review of the recent Special Forces, The World's Toughest Test, a military reality show featured on Fox. It's actually the largest viewed show since 2021 on Fox, and it's quite informative. Now, you might think reality TV and the military are not a match. Actually, they've been interesting bedfellows, going back primarily to 9/11, when shows like Combat Missions, Front Lines, Military Diaries, and a host of others, Camp, these shows, I know they were focused on, in many ways, an allegiance with the 9/11 tragedy and the politics behind it. On many of these shows, you find propaganda, but on a deeper level, these shows also offer the American public and the rest of the world some insight, I would say limited insight, but still, this limited insight offers something into military life. Is it scripted on these shows? Partially, but at the same time, there's also great realities behind them. Today, I focus on the show Special Forces, The World's Toughest Test. Now, this show was created for the United Kingdom, and it was successful a couple of years ago. Fox TV ended up picking it up and turning it into a show for the American public. Might I say that this show is distinct from most of the other military reality shows. Why do I say that? Usually when it comes to military movies, military TV shows, vetted reporters for news, military assessment personnel on CNN or on Fox News, many of these people, if not all of them, are tied to what Roger Stahl calls, from his book Militainment, War, Media, and Popular Culture. In his book, he uses the term military entertainment complex. And I would say that this show, Special Forces, is distinct because it is not filmed in the United States. It is not filmed on a U.S. installation. There wasn't any, at least from what I know, direct linking with the military public affairs personnel with the TV show. Instead, the show guided by 4 military veterans who are probably heard of the less than 1% of the special operations community. These gentlemen are quite stellar in their lives. Men like the chief instructor, Rudy Reyes, Recon Marine, 8 years scuba, parachute, sniper qualified. He served in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and he was also a contractor assisting the Kenyan Special Forces community after the terror attack in Kenya some years ago. We've got the legend within the special operations community, the wise fox, actually Sergeant Major Mark Billingham. He was served a career stellar life with the British Special Forces unit, SAS Special Air Service. He provides quite the taste of how this show unfolds, along with Rudy Reyes. We've got Jason Fox, who served in the British Royal Marines, and he had served and was an elite warrior and is also part of the guiding staff for the TV show. The interesting instructor here that joins all of them, they're all interesting, but one that I find quite interesting is Remi Adeleke. And what is interesting about Remi is that he migrated from Nigeria, or his parents migrated from Nigeria to the United States. And he grew up in the Bronx, really had no strong affiliation to the water, but ends up eventually becoming one of the truly elite Navy SEALs. You know, all of these elite warriors and their services are within the same, how could I say, within the same level. But I mention Remi because of just the irony. And each instructor has his irony. Rudy Reyes, the first to truly represent himself in film, as the first actor to really present himself in a war movie, HBO's classic Generation Kill. As we look at the show, we see that the show is set up where the four highly specialized warriors set up basic military tasks with flavors of special operations. There are 16 participants who volunteered to be on the show, and they come from the world of entertainment, the world of sports, the world of politics. It's quite the interesting mix, the 16. You've got Danny Amendola, Super Bowl winner. You've got one of the Spice Girls, one of my favorite Spice Girls, Mel B. You've got a contestant from the show The Bachelorette, Hannah Brown. And then Tyler Florence, a celebrity chef. Kate Gosselin, who is the mother of 8 children that were born pretty much at the same time. And she was on the show John and Kate plus 8. Dwight Howard, great NBA star. Montel Jordan, R&B singing star. Gus Kenworthy, an Olympic skier. Nastia Yokin, an U.S. Olympic star. Carly Lloyd, soccer player, professional soccer player. Beverly Mitchell from the TV show Seventh Heaven. Kenya Moore, Real Housewives of Atlanta. Mike Piazza, the Hall of Famer out of the New York Mets. Dr. Drew Pinsky, Celebrity Rehab Show. Anthony Scaramucci, the former White House communications director. And Jamie Lynn Spears, Britney Spears' sister. Now, you may look at me and why do I devote my time to reviewing this show? What type of value do we have on this show? I am not like Variety Magazine focusing on the viewership. I believe it 2.7 million views in the first episode. I'm not really caught up with the veteran bro cult dynamic as far as hero worshiping the veterans and elite warriors in charge of the show, guiding the different tasks for the participants. I'm more trying to extract parallels. What type of parallels? Narratives from these participants as they are tied to possible narratives of those who wore a uniform and served. Now, this show is not tied to war. It's not caught up with fighting. I do believe King Abdullah from Jordan made an appearance on the show. Quite interesting. We have we have civilian instructors, veterans, who share their knowledge and they share their assessments with these participants about the group as well as each individual participant. Each individual participant, much like military recruits, as well as folks in units and folks training in specialized schools, they have their own stories, their own narratives, their own lives, their own experiences. And on the recruiting commercials for like the Navy SEALs, you don't ever really see much of those narratives. Now, how can you, right? Those commercials are maybe 10 seconds long, but not that the participants are Navy SEALs or are within special operations, but they might offer some things from their stories in their experience of going through this training week to week. On every Wednesday evening, you can catch the show Special Forces, the world's toughest test, and you will see the different participants and you will be at awe with the different tasks that they perform. But I challenge you to pay attention to their narratives, to the things that they say. Imagine yourself with them. Imagine your son who joined the military or your daughter who is still on active duty. Imagine the neighbor's kid who served maybe in the Persian Gulf War. Imagine our Vietnam veterans and our Korean War veterans and our World War II veterans who are still alive and in many ways have had their stories not captured. And so maybe we have a certain level of entertainment and excitement with the show Special Forces. But at the same time, I'm wanting to point out that there's more here to this show. And on the first episode, it's quite interesting that 4 participants had to leave, and 3 of them left because of injuries, and 1 of them had to leave out of his own choice. I'm not going to get into all the details. You can watch the show for yourself. But I will say it was quite interesting because you've got one contestant, or participant, I should say, who is fearful about the water because of an experience she had involving her daughter. And one of the tasks on the show is to exit a helicopter with your body straight and your head hitting the water first. Now, I would say that this is like Outward Bound on steroids. Does the military focus on this type of task? No. But, you know, the way special operations personnel insert and extract themselves from helicopters is quite different. So let us remind you that this show is not trying to be the military, but if you pay attention closely, you'll notice that it's a show based on different celebrities, different human beings with their lives trying to challenge themselves And the parallel here with the special operator, the real special operator, with the training cadre, with other veterans who served, that the participants and many veterans out there, whether in elite forces or in just regular military units, they're trying to go beyond themselves, I think. So, with the one participant who had a challenge with the water, she kind of had to face that. And she had to face it up close and personal. And I think what happens in our popular culture of lightning speed media, we miss that in the real veteran. We miss that narrative in the real person on active duty that's being covered by the journalist. It actually happened to me when I returned from Iraq. And I was interviewed by the New York Daily News about my life-saving efforts for an Iraqi girl by the name of Rawan. You can look up the article in October of 2008. The journalist wrote so many things that were just more her projections and not my story, not my narrative. In other words, she added a political bent as to why I was caught up in trying to help this Iraqi girl. Now, that was quite different from my experience with Sergeant Major Surratt, Michelle Surratt, who at that time, I believe, was a staff sergeant. And he was in a combat unit, but also had services as a public affairs specialist, ranking NCO, with an incredible skill for interviewing. And he interviewed me. The Pentagon News report, and that article is present as well. In that article, you find quite a different narrative. Was it Staff Sergeant's valuable skill in interviewing as far as being a public affairs specialist, a journalist in the military, besides being in combat? Was it that he shared the same life that I had in the military and the others also deployed in Iraq? I don't know. I might want to ask him someday. I am curious because that article did offer something to me, and it did offer something for me to share with my 12-year-old son. And when I pass, and as I always say, when the worms take over, that article about that aspect of my life in Iraq with the child Rowan, it was captured well by Staff Sergeant Surratt. And I go back to the show and I recognize that there were interesting narratives coming from the different participants. For example, there are many fears and phobias that uniformed warriors carry, much like that one participant who spoke about her fears of the water, the elite Navy SEAL and one of the toughest men in the world, David Goggins, spoke about how he didn't enjoy the fear of heights, and yet he had many parachute jumps as a Navy SEAL. But he provides a narrative on the Joe Rogan show or on another show where he talks about that fear and how he managed that fear. There was another situation involving one of the participants where the whole military experience was haunting to her. I will mention her name because she is interesting. Her name is Kate Gosselin, and it just seems as though she's a complete disaster on the show. On a deeper level, if you're a vet listening, if you're someone on active duty listening, haven't we seen those train wrecks in the military? Maybe you were one. those train wreck recruits, officers, NCOs, regular Joes and Joannas wearing a uniform, those train wrecks have real lived experiences and they have stories tied to them. And so it was interesting to hear Kate Gosselin's efforts not to quit. For some reason, during the first major task of the show, we find Kate doing her record dive and doing it incorrectly. And by not having her body tight, that apparently affected the fall. And she was injured and she was taken out of the show because of a neck injury. She was very vulnerable in her words in regards to discussing her fears. And I wonder if veterans, even if we're not wearing a uniform, if we can be vulnerable like that to our family members, to those treating us at the VA hospital. I wonder, what is the language that we develop in our own lives? We must create that, much like Kate did. And that's something that Kate contributed to the show, and I believe indirectly to the military and veteran community. Narratives are important for the veteran and for the military member on the show. We've got these incredible kings of the athletic and sports world, like Mike Piazza and Dwight Howard. We see on this episode, Dwight Howard wanting to remain. He failed on one of the tasks involving crossing a canyon, basically tight-roping 300 feet high. And he was humbled, just like we were all humbled when we were in the military on one occasion or on many occasions by superiors, by instructors, by our peers, by our families. Let's pay attention to them. Let's also pay attention to those narratives of failure in the military when they come across our ears. Dwight is still on the show. I expect great things from him. I don't know. I just heard him speak to his instructor with a sincere heart. And I think by being such a gifted basketball player, someone who truly made an impact on the game, and to be humbled, I can connect with that. I was in the military 4 different times. I'm no hero. Those 4 times, I was honorably discharged each and every time. I served about 8 years total. I don't have these long, illustrious careers, but I served. I served proudly. I served in an elite unit early on in my career. I also served as an enlisted person and also an officer. And in my journey, I had many great experiences, but at times I did have challenging experiences. I had experiences where I failed my command, my team members, and I can be honest to say that I was failed by team members and by my command. We're in it together, and I'm brought back to the Billy Joel song, We'll All Go Down Together. And that is a powerful song. If you haven't heard it, play it, and you'll get the spirit of the things that I'm talking about in regards to the veteran/military narrative that is usually hidden in our culture because there is either propaganda or just the acceleration of media that prevents these narratives from circulating. I am not trying to politicize this audio essay. I'm just pointing out certain realities. And in the end, I think much of the military entertainment is just caught up with 2 things, and that's getting ratings, which equals advertising money to keep shows going, to keep networks going, and also the different methods for circulating television and movies and reality shows. Everything's just so supersonic. And I think this, in many ways, in a non-conspiracy way, I just think these are obstructing the hidden narratives of veterans. In this particular show, Special Forces, we have space for narratives to come out. The interesting narrative from the first episode regarding injury is brought up by Dr. Drew Pinsky, who's in his 60s and basically experiences heat exhaustion and ends up being sent home. Dr. Drew, though I don't agree with a lot of his things that he speaks about, I give him credit for being on the show, for being someone who's no spring chicken, and he did his best, it seemed, to be a participant and accomplish these tasks, and just had the misfortune of experiencing a high level of dehydration that created this heat exhaustion. These are things that are also found in the real military. I know one of my classmates, not from my same year at Norwich University, the Military College of Vermont, a fine cadet he was, as well as an outstanding officer. And when training, I believe it was at Fort Benning, Georgia, training, not the same as this type of training, entertainment, military training, but real military training, we find this real soldier collapsing due to heat exhaustion while he was leading troops. And he ended up with a lifelong condition, and he could no longer serve in the military. I believe he had a severe stroke due to heat exhaustion, and his life has been hindered in his service to his country. And for the rest of his life, his family will have to also be part of that military service tragedy. And so, as I say, we can learn a lot from this show. And the show is on every Wednesday. I will probably not do any more reviews except maybe the final episode. And we can look at the different narratives and we can see how they are connected to the military in some way. But I ask you, how do you closely listen and capture the stories and narratives of military personnel and veterans in your life? This isn't just for the civilian. This is for the other veteran, for the military person on active duty. As I end, I want to give a lot of credit to these instructors, Billy, Rudy, Remi, Jason. They offer their ears to each participant. And when you look at the show, you will notice that while paying close attention to the participants, they adjust to different military training tasks in a way to overwhelm the participant, but not destroy the will of the participant. This is quite interesting to me because I came from a broken family. And by the time I got to the military, I'm not sure what would have happened if my military experience was with people who didn't listen. And I can honestly say that most of the instructors I experienced paid attention to parts of my story and the stories of others. They challenged me. They were extremely overwhelming. And when people say the military was a family to them, I can say that as well. My family did not mean to be broken, but due to grave illness of my mother, as well as challenges experienced by immigrant parents, I endured a lot, and that did help build some character. But in the military, if I had been placed in a purely sadistic environment, I know that would have been detrimental to me. The lessons learned in my early military career helped me become a more effective leader in the future when I ended up being in leadership positions. What does Aristotle say? No, it's not in some West Point book from some general. You might think it is, but no, these are Aristotle's words. To be a good leader, you've got to be a good follower. And I think that the cadre, Rudy, Jason, Billy, and Remi, they all had to start at the bottom before they ended up becoming great. And what makes them valuable is that you can tell on the show in a very intimate way how at times they can go back to when they were a peon recruit, and you can see them in their greatness as the elite of the elite in the way that they give counsel, in the way that they instruct and provide the skills and the instruction for these participants. And it's interesting in my years in the military that I noticed that in other great military personnel, not all, I've had to deal with those leaders who were ill-equipped to lead, mentally unsound to lead. And I just remembered that I would not be like them. And I proved throughout my career not to be like them and also not to hold insane grudges. And I think that the show also shows in a certain way how you can have drawbacks like Dwight Howard, but then maybe you can rise like Mike Piazza successfully doing his helicopter insertion. There are other participants, and it seems that the courage of Anthony Scaramucci truly shows that the Trump presidency did not, how can I say, look at his greatness. I think for someone like Anthony, the Mooch, to show up on the show, I mean, it's not like he's the size of Mike Piazza or Dwight Howard or Danny Amendola. And he's with these intensive personalities. And so this Harvard Law School graduate, successful attorney, chose to challenge himself and it's still moving in the show. I'm interested in Mike Piazza as far as how he will be the rest of the series, because he explains how, well, we all know that he's a Hall of Fame baseball player. And I wonder what he explains of himself in the show as far as maybe being in this humble state where he's got to take orders when he used to give orders on the field. And at times, it's happened to us in the military. We've had to swallow our pride to be part of the mission, to honor our team members, and to honor our country. These aren't words of patriotism. They're words of what the Romans call the virtue of piety, pietas. It's this inner understanding of duty, an examined one that has great flexibility, where one day you might be a follower and another day you might be transparent to be a leader. There are many different things that come from the show, and I could have gone on and spoken about the other participants. I encourage you to read the reviews of the show. People Magazine has that, and other articles. These other contestants, well, before I leave, the interesting story of the Spice Girl, Mel B, who came from a very rough and abusive romantic relationship, and how she ends up in the show. And much like in the military, there's a task that involves on the show self-defense. And so the participants go against instructors. On this show, on this episode, I was so impressed by not just the Spice Girl who entertained my ears and my eyes, but I was entertained by her courage on this show. And I also was taken by the one instructor, the chief instructor, Rudy Reyes, who we all know was a martial arts champion prior to joining the Marine Corps. And all throughout the Marine Corps was caught up with the martial arts. And even after the Marine Corps, he has and still is involved in the martial arts. And he's a deep practitioner of the arts. Rudy has Melanie Brown from the Spice Girls, Mel B, spar with him on the sand. And you see her find the courage to confront him. At the same time, you find the sensitivity in Rudy to challenge her just enough so that she learns more about herself and her potential to bring up courage within herself and to even place some blows on the instructor, enhancing her courage, and the instructor having the humility, the deep humility. This type of deep humility the Roman warriors cultivated, self-control, this certain deep temperance that Rudy Reyes has towards the participant, Mel B, is quite healing in this very barbaric environment of reality TV where the world is watching. There are many layers of meanings to the show. Special Forces, the world's toughest test. Check it out. Enjoy it for what it is. Don't expect to find all of the military in the show, but try to find different stories, human stories that are tied to the participants, that might be tied to that one neighbor like I had as a kid who felt the shame that he failed Navy BUDS training, basic underwater demolition school. And I had come back with my jump wings in my Alpha uniform, looking locked and cocked, looking mean and green and tough and ready to take on the world. And yet I heard his story, and in no way did I rub it in, but I mentioned to him that it took courage to show up and be a part of Navy SEAL training. Now, I didn't hang out with Charlie. I was too busy dealing with my mother, who was ill with cancer. But I hope to one day go back to my town in Daytona Beach, Florida, and find Charlie and just say to him, it's all right. One never knows. One never knows. Even receiving all the greatest honors in the military, receiving all the rank, receiving all the elite status for those who complete all of those trainings, they have tragedies too. I remember the tragedy of, in the 80s, hearing about a Special Forces physician who killed his wife and daughter in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Now, this isn't a reflection on Special Forces. This is more a tragedy from someone who is elite, not only an elite warrior, but an elite individual in our society with the esteemed title of MD, of doctor. And so life is truly a mystery. I think we need books, we need YouTube videos, we need podcasts, we even need reality shows at times to remind us about life and about the struggles in life, the tragedies of life, and the joys of life. Thank you.
Veteran Etc. invites you to join us again with your host, Mike Kim, every Sunday. If the content from this podcast is informative to you, please share the podcast with others. Give a like and or post something you learned from the episode on social media. If interested in other truly informative podcasts like Veteran Etc., check out cominghomewell.com for a listing of other veteran-based podcasts. Thank you for tuning in.